from Ekurhuleni to participate in the elective conference. For SAfm News, I'm Zoleka Kotashe. I'll have your next news update at the top of the hour.
Giving you new perspectives and information with deep dive expert analysis of the biggest stories that shaped your world this week.
Please unmute. It is 6 minutes after 6 p.m. and it's a Friday. You are listening to This Week Today. My name is Oliver Dickson and I'm happy to be with you once again this evening all the way up until the top of the hour. We've got a jam-packed show coming up for you today and I really do want you to participate on it. At the end of the show, in the last couple of minutes, we will be speaking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the United States of America. Here's why the story is important for you and I to speak about. It is not just about abortion rights in the United States of America. It is about the impact it will have on access to abortions across the world, particularly in Africa and the global south. And that's why that story matters. So we'll speak about that a little bit later on. They have overturned the guarantee to abortions. Abortions are no longer guaranteed. That's what it simply means. If the right to abortion is no longer a constitutional guarantee, does that right truly then exist? That is the question we should be asking ourselves, right? A little later on. But we're going to start off the show with a very important conversation. This week, the final chapter and the final edition of the State Capture Report was released and handed over to the president. In effect, the Zondo Commission has completed its work 4.5 years later. Almost 5 years later, the Zondo Commission has completed its work. It is almost, 6 years about since the State of Capture report came out, penned by Thuli Madonsela. She will be joining us very shortly. The former public protector advocate Thuli Madonsela will be on This Week Today. We also want to speak about, and I really think we need to slow down here, this inflation conversation about hyperinflation having shot through the Reserve Bank's target of 5.9%, right? Now having shot to 6.5%, shooting through that target of actually, I think it was 6.2% they had targeted for May, but it shot right past that, and there's no signs that it will be slowed down. There are various tools and policy tools that turn our economy. Fiscal policy tools, monetary policy tools, tax policy tools, industrial policy tools, trade policy tools. All of those policy tools and levers matter, particularly when it comes to how it shapes up the economy and influences and impacts the cost of living. We're going to be speaking in a very short while to Dr. Pelisa Nkomo about what our policy, monetary and tax policy response should be to hyperinflation. And I use the term hyperinflation here quite loosely because it's a technical term and I'm being a little bit playing fast and loose with the technicality of the term. But we're going to speak about that. How do we bring down the cost of living in South Africa back into affordable margins? It was already not affordable to begin with, right? There's no end in sight in the war in Russia, but yet we're not planning around the inevitability of that becoming a protracted war spanning across years, which will likely be the case. Those sanctions on Russia are not going to be lifted anytime soon, and Russia's economic participation will remain constrained for a very long time. That matters, particularly as South Africa is our economic fortunes are in many ways tied to that of Russia, right? I mean, we're considering buying cheap oil from them. That's a conversation that's important. We also want to speak about the Commonwealth. Rwanda's having its day in the sun as the royal family descended upon Rwanda, and they're now having conversations. The Commonwealth member states, obviously 50 plus member states are there. Many of them rich states, many of them poor states, many of them very poor states. What is the relevance of the Commonwealth summits? I mean, is it just an alliance of formerly colonized states by the British? Or is this an economic bloc? If not, is it a geopolitical bloc with special concessions that bring about geopolitical advantages to its member state? If it doesn't do that, what is it meant to do? Right? What alliances and benefits do member states reap from it, other than being able to say we were once colonized? I mean, many of these states are even cutting their ties with the British, denouncing the Queen as their theoretical and ceremonial head of state, right? The Barbados did that recently. Haiti did that. Jamaica will be Jamaica also having done that. South Africa no longer has the British since we became a republic. No longer has the British Queen Elizabeth as a ceremonial head of state. So why then is the Commonwealth Summit or the Commonwealth bloc of countries still relevant, and why are we still a member? Why have we not pulled out of this? Why are many countries not pulling out of this? That's the question we'll be asking Professor Anthony van Nieuwerkerk, who's part of the Thabo Mbeki African School for Public and International Affairs. That's what's coming up on the show today. And of course, at the end of the show, we're going to be joined by Dr. Tlaleng Mofokeng. We're going to be speaking about the overturning of Roe v. Wade. What now should be the response of the global community? All of that and more coming up on This Week Today.
SMS SAfm now on 41391. The SABC News Portal is your one-stop digital platform for all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest and breaking stories. Listen to all SABC radio stations live, including podcasts, and also watch the SABC News channel with clips and live streams of all the big news events. Simply download the SABC News app on your smartphone from the Play or App Store. SABC News, independent and impartial.
I'm presuming, I think everyone's presuming there will be load shedding this year. Do we know roughly how much load shedding we can expect and when it is more likely to be?
Stephen, we definitely can say indeed that load shedding will still be with us, unfortunately, this year. We do expect certainly that there will be more load shedding than we did have last year. This is really because Kuba Power Station will only be operating at half capacity for 10 months during this year. We will, of course, do everything that we can to avoid or reduce the impact of the load shedding.
Sikunati Manchansha, spokesperson at Eskom, I really do appreciate the time.
First in the morning, SAfm Sunrise with Stephen Grootes. Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 106.1 FM in Bombela. Stay on top of all meaningful, top trending stories right here on SAfm. Leading the conversation. Oliver Dickson on SAfm.
Remember, you can participate in any of the conversations here we have on This Week Today by simply giving us a call. The number to dial is 011 714 2006, or you can simply send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0614 104 107. I'm also on Twitter, so do tweet me. It is at Oliver_speaking. I'm also on Facebook, Oliver Dickson over there, or you can simply find us at SAfm Radio across all platforms, and we'll be able to engage you across these various platforms. We're going to start off the show by speaking about the impact, the inflationary impact of the Russian war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. How should the South African government respond to what I again say this, I'm using this term very loosely here, call hyperinflation, which shot through the Reserve Bank targets. The cost of living is unsustainable. More and more people are slipping into poverty, living below the poverty line. More and more people can no longer afford essentials such as food, transport, and other essentials that matter, right? More and more businesses, operations are being constrained by this exact cost of living. How should we respond? How should we use our economic tools to be able to respond to this? I'm joined by Dr. Pelisa Nkomo on this particular conversation. Dr. Nkomo, let's start here. We, broadly speaking, whenever inflation moves, we use monetary policy tools to respond to inflation. Is that the only way we can and should manage inflation?
Okay, I think the first issue, let me just correct, I'm not Dr. Nkomo yet, but I love the pressure because clearly I need to get that PhD so that I become Dr. Nkomo. I think the second issue, and thank you, good evening to you and good evening to your listeners. I do think that South African government, like any other country in the world, is really caught into a situation that is beyond its control, right? As of now, right? But however, I think for most of us who have been heterodox economists, in particular, have been really calling for a better national planning, economic planning in this context that allows South Africa to be dependent on its own resources, but also to limit, but also to have a diversified approach in its own economic development so that it doesn't rely entirely on an export-led economy. So let me explain what the export-led economy does. And it's exactly where we are today. And that's why the central bank is going to struggle in the next monetary policy committee meeting whether it should actually increase interest rates or retain them. Is that an export-led economy is that amongst the key things is that it focuses on producing products for the export markets. It doesn't focus on producing or manufacturing products for the domestic market. Let me make a simple example around food. South Africa has always been a food insecure country. Almost 20 million South Africans go to bed without food. In Gauteng alone, 25% of South Africans go to bed without food. But South Africa is classified as a national food secure country. So what makes those two people to be insecure even much more worse during the Russia and Ukraine war is the fact that we focus on producing food for export markets instead of for domestic markets. So there are three key issues here, and I just want to stick a little bit with the food component.
Sure.
The food component is a critical driver to inflation currently, right? It's the fact that there's an issue around land inequality in this country, right? So access to land is a serious issue which makes a lot of people not to be able to produce food for themselves. The second issue is that 80% of South Africans buy food from supermarkets. So it means that only 20% that really produce food for their own consumption or who rely on a subsistence farmers. The third issue, it means that there's a crisis of food, there's a crisis in as far as the pricing and affordability. And this is particularly exacerbated by the issue of access to income, which is income inequality, and a lot of people who have lost jobs in the last 2 years due to the pandemic. So about 2 million South Africans have actually lost jobs, so that means that a lot of them. So in essence, now we're in the space where, in fact, the inflation is going to be a moving target. So the announcement yesterday of 6.5% was not surprising. But had South African government really been able to kind of like take the advice of economics to make it sure that it actually focuses on an employment-led economic growth.
I want us to pause there for a second because I want to spend some time delineating heterodoxical economic approaches to that of, I don't know, neoliberal or neoclassical, right? Economic approaches. What do you mean by heterodoxical? Because to me, it means that you can't respond to your economic situation as the rest of the world does. That's how I understand it to mean, but I'm not an economist. Take me into the technical minutiae thereof.
Oh, yes. So the difference, so let me talk about neoliberalism. Neoliberalism focuses on short-term objectives. It focuses on market fundamentalism. It assumes that markets are perfect to govern
and will
your
self-correct.
Economy, and that your economic architecture must be driven by markets. You don't need an interventionist approach, right? While actually on the parallel, then heterodox economists will then say, no, markets are actually not sufficient because they are not entirely perfect, right? Because amongst those, there's subjective interests of profit maximization, and sometimes they'll even undermine the very human rights which our constitution seeks to achieve.
Yeah.
So the government intervention is important.
So am I understanding it right?
Heterodox thinking, there's a whole notion about government has to intervene and, in fact, redirect some of the resources that could have been channeled in somewhere else. Let me just make a simple example. So, for instance, you'd see that South African economy has actually become a very service-orientated or tertiary economy in the last decade, if not 2 decades, right? And the tertiary economy part of it means that we're becoming more service-orientated. We're office-based orientated. I mean, I listened earlier to one of the economic analysts that, in fact, the real estate is struggling with office occupation. So, that service and tech related. Now, in a context where you have a Gini coefficient of above 70%, for instance, you need manufacturing industry because the manufacturing industry takes into account several components of skills that you have in the economy. It takes care of the unskilled labor. It takes care of the skilled labor, even of the semi-skilled labor. That's what the manufacturing industry is. So once your economy shifts, for instance, into a service-oriented economy, amongst those, it leaves out the majority. So if you recall, the statistics that have been released by State SA in the last 5 weeks, two important issues which that should give any economist, including policymakers and those ministers who are in power, is the fact that firstly, 62% of young people live a disengaged life and they lead unproductive lives. That's a concern because it's an indication of social instability. The second component is that black women and African women, 40% of them lead disengaged life and unproductive lives, right? So it means that you have such an important group of the population that, in fact, is not being disengaged in the economy. And so that it means is that they, particularly young people, even women, they see their dreams actually, being overtaken by time because the economic system is actually designed in a way that is not able to absorb them. So which is, in essence, for me, I'm saying that crisis presents an opportunity. So the key question is, how do we use this opportunity to make it sure that we reconfigure our own economy? We need to go back to basics. And part of the basics is that we need to build the economy from the bottom. Firstly, we need to start having confidence and trust in corporate economy because cooperative economy is embedded in the cultural identity of South African citizens, of which majority of them are actually black people. And that's how you're going to get both women and young people to gain skills, to gain experience, and to gain exposure.
So let's pause there for a second. So let's pause there for a second. I think you've explained really well why monetary policy approaches are a tad bit too late to deal with fundamental economic collapses elsewhere in the economy that has nothing to do with, or very little to do with, the inflation rate. You recommend that we go back to basics and build an economy that is bottom-up approached, right? What are some of the other interventions and I talk about in the immediate that can be applied to cushion against the blow of inflation at the moment? What are some of the fiscal policy tools and tax policy tools that can be used right now to turn the levers of the economy in such a way that it opens up some space for breathing, especially for the poor as well as the suffocated middle class? And I asked this in relation to what happened at the start of COVID, for instance. The Minister of Finance and the President were very happy to tell us that what they're doing is putting money back into the hands of people, and that's a real act of stimulus. When we, for instance, had a recession a couple of years ago, and the ratings agencies was on our neck about doing something, Minister Gigaba raised the VAT rate to close up that budget deficit, and that obviously had an impact on the price of food. And that seemed to me like a non-monetary policy tool that impacted the cost of living. What can we do in the immediate?
I think in the immediate, the first issue is that turn this country into a construction site, spend the more than R1 trillion that is currently within the government coffers to make it sure that young people have access to income, black women have access to income, and working class community and rural communities have access to income. For instance, let me make a simple example. I don't know how much time do I have. In 2019, we actually discovered that we had more than 100,000 people who never withdrew their social security because they had access into a construction or an infrastructure program. They had access to an employment. And they never went into collecting the money. So the key point I want to make here is that when you grant citizens opportunities to work, they will never go back into the social security safety plan. Everyone else wants to do is to make sure they lead a decent life and they have access to income, even though that will not help into dealing with income inequality. But I want to be consistent with the question you're asking, which is, what is it that we can do in the short term?
Yeah.
Deal with the construction, make South Africa a construction site, deal with the railway infrastructure from PRASA, get that money spent, deal with the infrastructure from Eskom, from Transnet, from municipalities, but coordinate it in a way that South Africans benefit, but in that, it's not private sector, because one of the mistakes we also make is that more often than not, the benefits of what is meant to go to citizens often is actually gets done by private sector, because we don't coordinate. Once, for example, we've given a contract to Telisa's manufacturing company, we take a hands-off approach. We don't monitor, for example, a skills transfer component. For example, we see young people and women waving flags for almost 6, sometimes to 9 months with absolutely no skills transfer. And that's why we're sitting with a crisis here, because South Africa is actually not done badly in as far as, capital formation spending. But in cases where it has done well, but we're not able to show in terms of skills transfer, so that the people who have been part of the construction program are able to move somewhere else and get jobs and secure jobs somewhere else when the construction program is not well. So get South Africa into a construction site, increase the spending. By the way, that's another thing as well. Since 2010, when President Thabo Mbeki was at the helm, which is, our capital formation, which is the infrastructure spending, had declined from 26% to 9%. And so obviously it means that we are actually keeping resources that we should be using for South Africans. So that's really the short term. That's a short-term mechanism, and I would really like to support it. But obviously, as a heterodox economist, it's always difficult sometimes to support short-term mechanisms, because exactly it's a short-termism that has led us into this crisis. But we actually have no choice, because if you roll out your infrastructure program in the next 3 years, at least it will keep families and households, but also stimulate demand in South Africa for at least for another 72 months to even 100 months. Forward.
So I'm gonna just the last question on that. For us to go into a capital expenditure overdrive, specifically on construction, specifically on infrastructure spending, that means we'd have to redirect money away from social welfare spending, right? Because that R1 trillion is not R1 trillion unearmarked, right? That money is already in the budget cycle doing stuff. Where then would we redirect the money from?
I really like your question, because that's a very important question. Let me tell you the first point in trying to attempt to answer your question. South Africa spends more than 50% of its GDP spending on its budget, almost above 50%, right? But on industrial development, it spends less than 10%. What does that mean? What message does it send? It sends a message that we are happy and we're fine with welfareism that we are actually providing this country. But this is at the expense of young people in this country, by the way, right? So in essence, actually, by the way, poor South Africans prefer to work than standing in queues for an income which they can't negotiate for, but also that for an income that is set, that does not provide sufficient safety nets. The 350, for example, that many South Africans, currently draw, which is about $28. At least the positive component is that, one, we can trace South Africans who are above the age of 18 to 59. We now know where they're located. We now know, for example, this morning I was talking in a panel where we discovered that 4 million South Africans who have passed matric, they have actually not been able to work, and they're drawing the 350. These are young South Africans.
Yeah.
And another 4 million, it's a young people who actually have not been working for the last 5 years, and they don't know what to do. And part of it as well is the 500,000 of graduates who are just sitting without anything to do. But that's sufficient from a data perspective. But it helps, that data is meant to help, the planners and policymakers and those who allocate resources and say, so what do we do with untapped resources? Because the skill and young people who are not used, it is a resource. But what it requires a much more robust planning. Just a last point, give me 1 second. Just the last point is, we need a firm level planning to make it sure that there's much more beneficiation and value add that will allow the 8 million people that I've referred to who are currently languishing in poverty, disengage and lead unproductive lives to be able to be part of the economy.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Pheli Sangoma. Really, really do appreciate it. Incredibly insightful. Once again, I appreciate, I'm indebted to you for coming on to This Week Today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Give us a call, 011-714-2006. You can also WhatsApp me on 0614-104-107. I'm also on Twitter. Tweet me at Oliver_speaking, or otherwise find me on Oliver Dickson on Facebook or at SAfm Radio across all platforms. On the other side of this, we continue the show.
SAfm has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Under the code, we are committed to giving news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that is not harmful, does not amount to hate speech, or contain violence or explicit sex. If you think we are not living up to that code, then you can inform the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. Direct any complaints in writing to the Broadcasting Complaints Commission of South Africa. PO Box 142365. Craig Hall 2024. Fax to 011-326-3198 or an email to bccsa@nabsa.co.za. For more information, please visit www.bccsa.co.za. The SABC News Portal is your one-stop digital platform for all the news you need. Stay connected with the latest and breaking stories. Listen to all SABC radio stations live, including podcasts, and also watch the SABC News channel with clips and live streams of all the big news events. Simply download the SABC News app on your smartphone from the Play or App Store. SABC News, independent and impartial. Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.6 FM in Mthatha. Keeping the Youth Month struggles alive. SAfm.
This year marks the 46th anniversary of the 16 June 1976 student uprising in Soweto, promoting sustainable livelihood and resilience of young people for a better tomorrow. Happy Youth Day from SAfm.
SAfm.
I'm Michelle Constant. Join the JSB crew and I every Saturday and Sunday morning between 7 and 10 a.m. We promise to keep you informed and entertained with innovation, culture, cars, travel, life learnings, environment, and of course, your big fat juicy. Small stories, big ideas, massive inspiration. The Jet Set Breakfast on SAfm.
At SAfm Radio and at Oliver_speaking on Twitter.
It is 25 minutes to the top of the hour. It was in 2016 when the State of Capture report came out, penned by then Public Protector Advocate Thuli Madonsela. What is it? 7 years later? 7 years later. 6 years later. We're sitting now with a complete report by the State Capture Commission that came as a result of a recommendation by the State of Capture report. Did all of it work out? Joining me to have this discussion right now is former Public Protector Advocate Thuli Madonsela. Advocate Madonsela, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Are you a happy woman today? Advocate Madonsela? Ooh, it seems like our Zoom line has fallen on us over there. Let's see if we can get Advocate Madonsela on a different line as we continue this conversation on the other side of this.
Across South Africa, online and on radio. SAfm, let's talk. Here, there, and everywhere. SAfm 105.5 FM in Tabazimbi.
Oliver Dickson on SAfm.
So we lost Advocate Madonsela there on the Zoom line, but we do have on the telephone line. I'll start here. I don't know if you could hear my introduction there, Advocate Tuli Madonsela, but I'll start here. Are you happy? Are you a happy woman today?
Thank you, Oliver. Greetings to you and to the listeners. I'm sad and happy. In a way, it is paradoxical.
Yeah.
Let me start with why am I sad. I'm sad that there was so much wanton looting of our limited public resources and hijacking of the operations of our government by a few for their personal gain. And as you say yourself, 6 years later, they are still enjoying the money, and by the time we get it, there will be very little of it.
If
left.
we get it.
If we do. So that saddens me. What also saddens me is that there's no contrition.
Yeah.
There's no sense that really this was wrong. Maybe we didn't know that the money would be siphoned out of the country, and we saw it to South Africa. I'm nonetheless happy that the State Capture Commission by Chief Justice Sondo has given us a very clear picture of what happened in this process of hijacking our state. And we can see clearly this huge monster that I would call a Leviathan and its tentacles, where all of the tentacles were. And it's really now up to us to look at, are those tentacles still there? For example, in my original mandate, we wouldn't have looked at the State Security Agency, but we now know that that was part of the tentacles. And therefore we need to get a clear picture of where are these tentacles now, and to what extent are those tentacles still sabotaging our democracy? Because there can be no democracy when a handful have hijacked processes of governance and they are repurposing those processes for personal gain. It started with the state procurement system, but it ended up with poisoning just about everything, so that everything was orchestrated for the success of this criminal syndicate.
Maybe I want to maybe pivot here a little bit. Do you mind spending some time telling us what you imagine the difference to be between corruption and state capture?
Thank you, Oliver. I understand corruption to be... Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. I'm with you.
Yes. I understand corruption to be abuse of entrusted power for personal gain. State capture is a form of corruption, but it is more poisonous than corruption, in that not only are you getting a transactional distortion and possibly loss of money, here you're losing the whole democracy project. When you have a handful of people having hijacked the appointment of ministers, appointment of state-owned enterprise CEOs and directors, and generally controlling what happens in strategic places in government, then you not have a democracy. Because in a democracy, we think that we are appointing public representatives to go and govern for the people, guided by the Constitution, laws, and party manifestos. Here, you have a governing party that was not governing because the will of the people, which would have been executed through Parliament and an executive that is guided by the law and the Constitution, you end up with a handful of people twisting everything to their personal needs and gain.
Did the Zondo Commission pan out how you imagined and hoped it would when you made the recommendation that such a commission should be appointed?
No, it didn't. Number one, it took far longer than what I had anticipated. I thought it would take 6 months. But secondly, it had a much wider scope, which is what President Zuma gave it, above the scope of just finishing an already started investigation, which would have taken 6 months. But thirdly, it has given us a far more frightening picture of how we nearly became a failed state, really one of those Southern African countries where a handful in a criminal syndicate are directing things in government, and money is being looted, people are being fired and hired, and processes are being distorted.
I want to go here a little bit because part of the recommendations that Chief Justice Zondo had penned down in his final report was for a permanent commission to be instituted, an anti-corruption and state capture commission that will do continuous work around investigating state capture and corruption. What do you make of that particular recommendation?
I think it's a good recommendation. In South Africa, we currently have what I've referred to as a polycentric accountability system, which means we have multiple institutions that can investigate and ensure accountability for transgressions in state affairs, which includes corruption. The difficulty with this is that you don't then have a process owner, a clear picture of corruption, and a continuous and agile response to corruption. Most countries do have an anti-corruption commission, and I agree to having one.
Here's why I asked that question, because South Africa's body politic is often criticized as being one that is very duplicative, in the sense that we prevaricate around taking action by instituting many other institutions to do things that other institutions do, right? So, I mean, what then is the point of the Hawks? What then is the point of the NPA, Special Investigative Unit, if we're going to be instituting a anti-corruption? I know one has investigative power and one has a prosecutorial mandate, but why should we have this commission when we already have institutions tasked with investigating criminality?
Well, the NPA investigative unit would remain like you have the FBI in America, focusing on organized crime, which often corruption is a form of organized crime. You would still remain with the SIU being able to do massive once in a while investigations. Your anti-corruption commission is not going to only look at grand corruption or white-collar corruption as we have seen in this. It will be looking at all forms of corruption, including bribing a Home Affairs official, which is part of the massive problem we have and which has led to people taking justice into their own hands in the form of things like dudula. You will deal with the bribing of traffic officers, bribing of court clerks and for files to disappear, bribing of policemen in the just general day-to-day criminal justice process. And then, of course, it will deal with these things. I honestly do think that having an anti-corruption commission that would function pretty much similar to the way the Scorpions functioned in the past when it comes to big issues.
And just
what we need, right?
And just the last question here, and I know Advocate Madonsela, you have a very kind heart, and don't ever want to come across as critical or abrasive even, right? But within your modesty and kindness, I do want you to give this a real consideration. What do you think the Zondo Commission could have done better? I'm asking this because, of course, this thing is going to be, taken on review processes across the, judiciary, and will be dragged out for quite a while. We've become an incredibly litigious state, and weaknesses in the Commission's work and the report will be exposed in those review processes. Were there moments you followed the Commission and thought, that perhaps was not the most strategical approach by the Commission, or this would have been a better way to do that, or whatever the other case may be, to insulate itself from some of the critiques that were preempted and may be exposed in the review process?
From a due process point of view, from a legal rights point of view, I have nothing against the Commission. I believe that there was due process. I believe people were given massive opportunities to represent themselves, and some abused the process by trying to throw dead cats and entertain us about things that happened in a period that had nothing to do with what was being investigated. What I do think could have been done better has already been acknowledged by the Chief Justice. He does think that now, with the benefit of hindsight and 2020 vision, the sequencing of the investigation management could have been a little bit more flawless. In that, for example, if you were dealing with let's say the Nsanhlaneni dismissal, it would have made sense to take all evidence relating to that, or if you're dealing with what happened at ESCOM, it would have been better to follow that line to conclusion. And so the Chief Justice has already indicated, why that was not possible, because when they started, they were rushing against time. So in trying to catch up with time, they ended up taking far longer time because of the sequencing of investigations. For me, as a trained investigator and as somebody who also trains in investigation tasks, one way, and I'm not criticizing the approach taken here, but one way of dealing with these matters is to distinguish between issues and issue creeps, which is difficult in this case. But stay on the ball on the main issue, and when issue creeps come, you have a different team that's looking at them, and then they will come for a secondary investigation. That's how we're trained in sharpening teeth, and maybe that could have been saved time on the big things. But understanding that it was difficult here because the Chief Justice was not restricted to the original investigation.
Do you think Chief Justice Zondo should have appointed deputy commissioners?
Well, he was not given the power to appoint deputy commissioners. Again, I'm glad you are asking these questions, Oliver, because I do think that we need to change the Commission Act. I think also as a country we need to professionalize the profession of investigators, just to make sure not just any lawyer or any person can just rock up and investigate.
But we have the forensics capacity, do we not?
Pardon?
We have the forensics capacity, do we not?
We do have the forensic capacity in this country, and we did a forensic, and I want to believe that the Chief Justice did a forensic. There's no way, for example, we would have called the bluff on the pictures. Remember, their first public statement had been they never met with Minister Jonas. It was only when they realized from our forensics that we had the information that the story changed, which said, okay, we met him, but for different conditions. So yes, we do have forensic capacity in this country. It's just a question of choreographing or systematizing the investigation process, and that could be included in the terms of terms of reference of commissions and just investigation bodies.
Yeah. Advocate Thuli Madonsela, thank you so much for your time. And I guess thank you to the work you did as then Public Protector and for seeing it through. I really do hope that you sleep with better ease with the finalization of the commission.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. That's former Public Protector, Advocate Thuli Madonsela. On the other side of this, we speak to Prof. Anthony von Nieuwerkerk, and we're going to speak about the Commonwealth Summit taking place right now.
SAfm 104 to 107 nationwide, leading the conversation.
This week, today on SAfm.
Prof. Anthony von Nieuwerkerk, who's a part of the Thabo Mbeki African School for Public and International Affairs. Thank you so much for your time today here on This Week Today. I want to start here. Is the Commonwealth still... Firstly, what is the Commonwealth? I could never wrap my head around it. Is it a political alliance? Is it a geopolitical alliance? Is it an economic alliance that gives special economic benefits to its member states? What actually is it other than an alliance of the formerly colonized?
Yeah, it's a relic of the past. And the question is, well, good evening. Happy to talk to you. I hope you can hear me.
Very clearly.
Right. So the Commonwealth, like the non-aligned movement, is a product of historic conditions. And people really ask, like you do now, is it relevant and is it worth having going forward? I can make the argument for the Commonwealth's relevance, but only to some extent. So the British, who colonized 60% of Africa, parts of the Caribbean, large parts of Asia, when it lost its imperial status and power, it resorted to this club of well-meaning friends called the Commonwealth. It's very symbolic. The Queen sits at the top, and everybody who was a victim of British colonialism in the past has joined this club because there might be some kind of measure of goodwill going forward. So some people even argue, like the Namibians would argue when they confront the Germans with their colonial past, this is time for payback. You've exploited us, you've humiliated us, you've done us in. It's time for you to help us navigate the complex contours of the modern world. And I think this is what the members of the Commonwealth do. We don't really believe, do we, that the Queen is this fantastic leader, or that the UK, which exited the EU a couple of months ago, is really a leader in world politics, or that Boris Johnson is an impeccable leader of moral upright standing worth following. No, none of these things, I think, that's symbolic of the Commonwealth makes any sense to us. I think realpolitik, hard politics, our own interests require from us to say, if you really want to take us into your club, let's talk about the benefits of membership. And that is what we are putting to the test with the Commonwealth today.
Yeah, because it doesn't seem like there are true economic benefits to reap from it, right? I mean, the Commonwealth has incredibly well-off member states and poor member states and really poor member states. Rwanda, the host country this year, being one of those incredibly poor member states. And there doesn't seem to be a trickle down or a cross-pollination of those resources, expertise, and goodwill. I'm not even sure that the goodwill really exists. What then should poor states, developing states, and the global south ask for when they get there this weekend, as they are engaged this weekend?
Yeah, so they're already engaging, and you point to an anomaly or maybe a paradox. Rwanda is very proud to host the Commonwealth meeting this year. It's going out of its way to show goodwill. There's this iconic picture. If you Google Commonwealth now, you will see one of the opening speeches by the Prime Minister of the UK, Boris Johnson, standing at the podium. In the background, sitting on the podium, is none other than our own Foreign Minister. Our President is not there. Now, if you ask me, I think Rwanda is playing the game quite shrewdly by exploiting as much as it can to promote its own interests in terms of international politics. And it's simply trying to use the UK to position itself better. I'm sure one of your next questions will be about this nonsensical migration refugee deal pact. Okay, we can talk about that in a minute. But what I want to say is that Rwanda has realized that the Commonwealth, a club of 50 plus members, has some standing in international affairs. You might be able to bargain a little bit and get something out of the UK because, can I quickly say, and this is not a friendly comment about the politics and the position of the UK in global affairs, they exited the EU with Brexit, and they are sort of tossed, on the seas of difficulties, uncertainties, and turbulence, especially now with the Ukraine war with Russia and NATO.
Yeah.
And they're trying to find their feet. And I think the reason why Prince Charles, Boris Johnson, and some of the elites in UK circles are in Kigali in Rwanda this weekend is to show that they want to be relevant and they are reaching out to us as the former colonized.
Can I ask you just a final question here, Anthony, because we are a little bit pressed for time, and I'm so sorry. But I want to ask you this.
Yeah.
The Commonwealth, ironically, is taking place at the same time as BRICS member states are meeting. BRICS can really be called South Africa's right-wing friends in the global community, while the Commonwealth is the opposite, right? South Africa's liberal friends in the global community. Do we find ourselves at a diplomatic contradiction here?
Yeah, sure. You're pressing me for time, so let me see if I can put this in one sentence. I wish we had more time for this conversation. It's really important because, the world is changing in front of our eyes. The war in Ukraine, Russia standing off with NATO means that the rules of the game is changing or are changing. And so as South Africa, we have to choose. Our president chose BRICS. He didn't choose the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth is a relic of the past. The Commonwealth is not going to help us to position ourselves properly. BRICS will probably do that. And I think we're throwing our weight in with China, Russia, and the global south.
Oh, just a final question here. As South Africa reimagines its place in the global community, right? And I'm assuming that we're doing a great deal of that. I mean, our president came in and positioned himself as an investment crusader. Part of that means we have to fix some of those relationships. And the world kind of looked at us with weird eyes when we didn't want to take a position on the Russian invasion of Ukraine, right?
Yeah. Yes.
Where do we align?
Yes. Right. That's such a good question. I wish I have more time. Can you set up another meeting so we can have this conversation with you and the listeners? I think that it will be our president will be badly advised to choose the one or the other, the Europeans and the Americans or the Chinese and the Russians. In fact, I would advocate that we choose non-alignment in our foreign policy, which is an old Cold War concept that needs to be refreshed, brushed up, and made and modernized for today's situation. And by the way, why should we be non-aligned in terms of global politics? It is because we want to promote our own national interests. There are no friends in international relations. There are permanent interests, no permanent friends. Do you think do you think Boris Johnson is a friend of South Africa?
Absolutely not.
Or do you think Putin is a friend of South Africa?
The ANC would have you believe he is.
No. Let's be realistic. Let's pursue our national interests where we can find them in a very turbulent world order. And it means we don't choose sides.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we are neutral. It means we are not aligned to the one or the other. So these big powers...
Isn't that moral cowardice?
No. We are standing up to bullies.
Okay.
Right? So the Americans, the EU, the Chinese, the Russians, even the Indians, these are bullies. They are big powers. They say, join me or I'll punish you.
Yeah.
And I think it's moral courage to say no. It's the opposite of what you just said.
Yeah. Look, on a different day, I'll have you back, and I want us to speak about the mechanisms of non-alliance, because I think that matters when we conceptualize our foreign policy. But thank you so much, Professor Anthony von Nieverkerk. It really is a pleasure to have you here. It's a pleasure having had you on the show. It is 7 o'clock. That brings us to the end of this week today. I will be back with you next week. Stay safe, stay warm, and most importantly, the mandate may be gone for masks, but please do still wear your mask. It is not safe out here. My name is Oliver Dickson. 7 o'clock, time for your news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAfm News.
In your top stories at this hour, 2 children die after poisoning and U.S. Supreme Court overturns right to abortions. Good evening, I'm Zolega Kotashi. Learners and educators at Utopia Farm School near Bethlehem are reeling in shock. This after 2 sisters aged 10 and 14 who are learners at the school died after allegedly consuming beans at home. Free State Department of Education, MEC Tate